Strange Shadows, a Karkash and Smith podcast.
As an intern in the terrestrial hospital at Ignar, I had charge of the singular case of Rodney 7, the one surviving member of the Octave expedition to Yoh Vombis, and took down the following story from his dictation. 7 had been brought to the hospital by the Martian guides of the expedition. He was suffering from a horribly lacerated and inflamed condition of the scalp and brow, and was wildly delirious part of the time and had to be held down in his bed during recurrent seizures of a mania whose violence was doubly inexplicable in view of his extreme debility. The lacerations, as will be learned from the story, were mainly self-inflicted. They were mingled with numerous small round wounds, easily distinguished from the knife slashes, and arranged in regular circles, through which an unknown poison had been injected into 7's scalp. The causation of these wounds was difficult to explain, unless one were to believe that 7's story was true and was no mere figment of his illness.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 6 of Strange Shadows, where today we're paying a visit to Mars. The voice you just heard at the start there was Shelley de Cruz of Braveheart Designs, reading the opening paragraph of today's story. I'm one of your hosts, Rob Poynton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yeah, we're looking at an absolute classic today. We're looking at the Vaults of Yoh Vombis. Now, I couldn't help noticing the way you said to Mars. I hope you're going to put some echo on that and a bit of to Mars.
Let me do that again.
To Mars.
There we go.
Yeah, this is top tier Smith, isn't it? This is such a great story. And what I like about this is we've had a lot of Smith science fiction, which has been okay, It's been enjoyable, but not particularly the stories you go back and read again. This seems to combine the best of his science fiction with the best of his horror and the weird.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that I'm surprised nobody's done an adaptation on, because if you gave this the proper sort of Ridley Scott Alien treatment, because it is very kind of similar in a way, I mean, to the opening bits in Alien, where they go down into the wreck and the squiggly thing on the face. It's, it's quite a similar setup, isn't it? I think it'd make for a really atmospheric movie.
Totally, absolutely. And I can't help but think there was some influence on Alien for this. Yeah. And so far, I've spotted at least 3 Star Treks in this as well, which I'll mention as we go through. So again, we come to that thing. I'm sure Smith must have had an influence on Roddenberry and Star Trek. There's just too many things for it to be coincidence.
There is, you're right.
Now, I think in common with most of Smith's science fiction, we don't have so much the Baroque language in this. We certainly don't get that sort of Zothic effect, if I can put it that way. But nonetheless, there are a few words that I didn't recognise, 1 or 2 that I had to look up. So let's start with our favourite words.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, as we'll see, something I noticed a few stories ago, that the ones that have more revisions have less of the Baroque language. And as we'll see in just a moment when I get to the publication history, that seems to apply here again. But there was a few that I liked and a couple I had to look up. The first one was actually teocalis, which I'd never known the actual proper name for that. That's the Mesopotamian pyramids, the sort of square ones with the temple on the top. That's what it's actually called. I didn't realise that.
Yes, I was totally unfamiliar with that word as well. Yeah. My first choice is gneissic, which is metamorphic rock. So that's the rock that is formed in those stripes. And there's my first Star Trek reference, because the episode with the Gorn and, the famous rock formation just put me in mind of that.
Oh, nice. The next one I got was actually, it's a word that everybody knows, but it was a spelling this time, and it was taboo, but spelt Tabu as opposed to Taboo. It's just an alternative spelling. It's it's the archaic sort of spelling of it.
We have a biblical reference with Anakim, who were Old Testament giants from the land of Moab, who I believe were wiped out by the Israelites.
Yeah. One we've had before, but I like it, so we're having it again, is adumbrations, which means to represent in outline a shadow or faint image.
And my next choice is Aeonian or Aeonian, which reminded me of my music theory back in the day. Of course, there's a Aeolian scale.
Indeed.
But Aeonian refers to time. It means ageless or eternal. While we're on the Aeolian scale, I'm going to put a link up to one of my videos I did some years back, which is something that was recorded at Miskatonic University, the music department, which is a lesson on the Miskatonic scale. So I'll put that up for you to enjoy.
Nice. My next one is a word that I'm now going to be using in stories because it's great. It's turgescent.
Oh, yes, that's good.
Which means becoming swollen or distended. Yeah, a turgescent worm, Brilliant. Yeah.
And I think my final choice is this two-word phrase, antic procession. So procession, we know what that is, but antic. So you think of antics, that kind of thing. But antic actually means grotesque or bizarre, which I was not at all familiar with.
Yeah, that threw me because I thought it was going to mean like ants, like a line like ants kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that threw me. But for my final one is another one that threw me because it's filiated, which everybody knows is, most people are familiar with that as being the child of a certain parent, the filial thing, right? But in the context, it really threw me. So I looked it up and it turns out that there's two other definitions of the same word. The first one being line of descent or derivation, and the other one being the act of forming a new branch, i.e. society or language.
Ah, interesting.
So there you go. I think in this context, it's line of descent.
Right. Yes, and as I say, I think although we've got a few words there that we weren't familiar with, I had to look up, and there's a couple of others as well.
Yeah.
And although the language is perhaps not quite as baroque as we mentioned, there's some great imagery in this and some wonderfully horrific and creepy scenes.
There's actually a paragraph that made me go, ooh.
Yes.
Which, you're going to know the paragraph I'm talking about. So it was just like, this is definitely one of Smith's nastier stories, isn't it?
And in some ways, in that descriptive writing, one of his more Lovecraftian, because some of the phrase is very Lovecraftian.
Indeed.
And there's speculation that this was partly influenced by The Mountains of Madness, which he'd read not long before he wrote this. Certainly this idea of when they come across the friezes and carvings of the old race, that's we can see an obvious parallel there to the Mountains of Madness.
Indeed, yeah, and the creatures are not a million miles away from Shoggoths, are they?
They're kind of mini Shoggoths. They're hat-sized Shoggoths.
Yeah, hat-sized Shoggoths. I love it.
I don't think that's going to start a new fashion trend, do you?
No.
Do you remember? I don't know. One time in the 80s, berets were in fashion. Like everyone was looking very jazzy and all that.
Oh God, yeah.
And then sometimes people have worn fedoras or whatever.
Yeah, the beret thing. I think that came out of the New Romantics, didn't it? That came from like Boy George, didn't it? And people like that.
Yeah. So Shoggoth hats. There we go. .com.
He doffed his Shoggoth at the passerby.
Have you ever doffed a Shoggoth?
Not in public.
You like Kipling? I don't know. I've never kippled. There you go.
Nice.
All right, let's get into this now. This is quite a publication history. Well, there's a lot of background to this story. All right, there's a lot went on.
Yeah, it was. It basically, the story had the working title of The Vaults of Yoh or Vombis, however you pronounce that, and was originally set on an unnamed planet with an unknown race. He wrote there's a synopsis that he wrote, which I'm just going to read you a couple of bits out of it here. Some human explorers on a dying world who are driven to take shelter in subterranean vaults by a strange, crawling, mat-like monstrosity called the Vorthlup. The vaults are evidently of Mausolean nature and contain the mummies of an unknown race, some of which lack the upper portions of the head. And then the rest of the synopsis carries on in a similar vein to the story. I don't want to get into it too much because it'll basically spoiler the entire episode. But at some point, it was after he'd written The Seedling of Mars that this story changed. And he decided to set it on Mars and have Martians and all that kind of stuff. And that's when the title changed as well. Now, another potential influence on this story, as it was postulated, this theory was actually postulated by Steve Behrens. I believe you've got the book in your hand there, right there, as we're talking.
Yes, I think we've referenced this once or twice on the show, but obviously most of the time we're referencing the Nightshade books and, of course, Dawnwood Spire, Lonely Hill. But another must-have for any Smith enthusiast is Clark Ashton Smith, A Critical Guide to the Man and His Work by Steve Behrens. And that's put out by Borgo Press. I'm sure that's pretty widely available still. I've got the second edition here, which was 2013. And this was for quite some time and still is one of the main reference books. It basically talks about Smith's life and how he developed his various settings, Averoigne, Zotique, Mars, and so on. An excellent book, well worth getting.
Yeah, well, Behrens postulates that it was actually wildfires that inspired the change, because there's an excerpt of a letter that Smith wrote to August Derleth where he describes the sky after one such blaze as being as dark and dingy as the burnt-out sky of the planet Mars. And the story he later described to Derleth as a rather ambitious hunk of extraplanetary weirdness.
I'd go along with that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's interesting because apparently Smith battled the wildfires during the summer of 1931, and the story was completed on September the 12th, 1931.
Right, so very close then.
So he probably had that image in his head while he was writing it. You know, because you know what it's like. It's like when I went to Bury St Edmunds and I saw the mummified cats. The first thing I did when I got home was write a story that had mummified cats in it.
Absolutely.
It's just the sort of thing you do, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm thinking as well of the city of the Singing Flame, right? And where the landscape there, again, feeds directly into the story.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, Smith then submitted it to Weird Tales, where...
Let me guess.
It was rejected.
Rejected.
Yeah.
How can you reject a story like this?
Well, this is it. We actually get Wright's reasoning here. Yeah, Wright wrote to Smith telling him to speed up the first half on the plea that many of his readers would never get to the interesting portion as it stands. What? He has a very low opinion of his readers, doesn't he?
He does. He does seem to, doesn't he? Yeah.
As you would imagine, Smith wasn't happy about this at all. And he wrote in reply, "Oh hell, I suppose I can leave out a lot of the descriptive matter, but it's a crime all the same." And this interesting correspondence with Lovecraft, because Lovecraft basically told him to stand his ground.
Which Lovecraft often did, right? Because, as we know, he was very against revising anything.
Yeah. Lovecraft wrote, "If I were in your place, I'd tell Wright to go to Hades and take my chances on rejection. He would probably take the tale in the end, even if not now, and any change in so well-balanced a narrative would be the sheerest vandalism." But Smith basically said, well, that might work for you, but I really need the money, basically.
Yeah, he was in quite dire straits at the time. His parents were ill and everything else, weren't they, at the time?
Yeah.
So what a position to have to be in.
Yeah, his reply was, "I would have told Wright to go chase himself in regards to the Vaults of Yoh Vombis if I didn't have the support of my parents and debts to pay off." It's a sad state of affairs, really. You've got this incredibly creative person with these great, wonderful ideas, just having to do things he doesn't want to do to pay the bills. It's
well, we're back to too many notes again, aren't we?
We are
exactly that same situation.
Yeah. So reluctantly, Smith completed the revisions on October the 24th and resubmitted it. This time, Wright loved it. He absolutely loved it. Writing in his letter of acceptance that it was a tremendous tale, a powerful story. And Smith was paid $63 for the story. And there's an amusing little aside that he wrote to August Derleth here. I mucked myself out of $17 on the price by the surgical excisions which I performed.
That's a double burn, isn't it? So you've got the burn of having to vandalise your own work, and you're getting less money.
Yeah, he's $17 worse off because he's done what he was told.
Which at the time was a not, you know.
Oh yeah, it was quite a sum at the time.
Sum,
yeah. Anyway, the story was eventually published in the May 1932 issue of Weird Tales. Now, I went through the ones afterwards to look if there was any correspondence about the story. Unfortunately, the eerie in those issues was all taken up with that big debate that we've discussed before about whether to reprint Frankenstein or not.
Oh, really? Right.
Yeah, it was raging on and on and on and on. So there's nothing but... because they had a reader's poll. They had a little bit you could cut out and send in with your favourite story from each issue. It came joint first.
Oh, good.
So there you go.
So you got some vindication in that respect.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what we have here now, is this the original version, do we know? Or is this the Weird Tales version with the edits?
The present text was established by a comparison of the typescript of the original version, originally presented by Smith to Robert H. Barlow, and now in a private collection, with the typescript of the published version, with consultation of the published versions in Weird Tales and the subsequent Arkham House reprint. So, yeah, this is basically the completest version that we have.
Oh, excellent.
And it's interesting because we mentioned Steve Behrens, because it actually mentions here in the book, in the Nightshade book that we're going from, in describing the origins of the Vault of Yoh Vombis, as well as in the determining its present text, the current editors must acknowledge the pioneering work of Steve Behrens. It is impossible to walk this path without following his footsteps. So there you go.
Oh, that's nice. That's yeah, and isn't it great that here and there are these original versions available still? And it does make me wonder sometimes what else might be out there, still locked away in a trunk. Who knows? But it's great that that original version wasn't lost.
Yeah, definitely.
So as we heard at the opening there, the preface begins by setting the scene. We're definitely on Mars, and we're in the terrestrial hospital at Ignar, which is sort of the human capital of Mars, the main city. And here's the second Star Trek. We're only 2 lines in. I had charge of the singular case of Rodney 7. Now, that's Severn, as in the Severn River.
Yeah.
But I couldn't help but be reminded of Gary 7 in Star Trek, the original series.
Nice.
And, of course, there's a lovely little joke in here, which, me being a bit slow, I didn't get till halfway through. Rodney 7 is a member of the Octave expedition under Mr. Octave. So we've got Mr. 7 and Mr. Octave.
Yeah, the thing that struck me about Mr. Octave, what was his full name? Alan Octave, which struck me instantly. He would be a keyboard player in a 1977 punk band. Alan Octave on the keys. It's got to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Monty Oxymoron. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I might adopt that as a new stage name, I think.
Alan Octave. Yeah.
Yes, it would make a change. My old one was Anonymous Bosch. So that's time for a change.
Bosch, I like it.
So, yeah, poor old Mr. 7 is suffering from these horrible lacerations and is also wildly delirious. And the creepy thing is these lacerations appear to be self-inflicted, although they're mingled with numerous small round wounds easily distinguished from the knife slashes and arranged in regular circles through which an unknown poison had been injected into Seven's scalp.
Yeah, because you've instantly got the sort of implication there, haven't you? Because you think about those circular puncture things, you instantly think of a leech or a lamprey. Something along those lines, right? Those circular maws with all them little needle teeth. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And again, it's something we've said on Innsmouth Book Club a lot. If you want Lovecraftian monsters, don't look out to the stars, look in to the seas and in your microscope.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it gives us this hint. The one thing I like about this, it's very typical Smith in that there's not a huge amount of world building, but what there is so effective.
Mm-hmm.
because Mars is, well, it's not a dead planet because, as we find out very soon, there are inhabitants on Mars, yet they're just like a sort of remnant or a shadow of a far older civilization. And in typical Lovecraftian style, with old civilizations come old monsters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the parallels to things like Mountains of Madness are definitely there. I mean, you know, and there's a lovely bit that we'll get to in due course that hints to something more as well, which I thought was gives that sort of cosmic element to it, even though, yeah, it's on Mars, so yeah, that's there anyway. But you know what I mean in terms of the cosmic horror. Yeah, it's, I like it all the way through. There's these little things drip fed, like that one of the guys had also been on Venus, and he'd been doing, you know, research on Venus before he came to Mars. It's that those little bits, little snippets. You don't have to go into full info dump mode, do you? Just a little snippet here and there that just fleshes out your characters and hints to a bigger world outside of the story that you're reading.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And yeah, we've got this sense of mankind moving off of Earth and now exploring and colonizing the other planets and all that kind of thing, which I guess, you know, was a common theme of sci-fi, well, and still is, really. It's interesting that now when you see that type of theme, we're going out to other galaxies and that sort of thing, whereas at this stage, pre-space race, you know, Mars was as far away as Alpha Centauri. In effect.
Yeah. Well, it's like they'd only just recently discovered Pluto, haven't they, and things like that. You know.
Yes, or Yuggoth, to give it its proper name.
Indeed. Yeah.
So yeah, there's some very nice world building goes on with this, and later on, I really like the associations with Egypt as well.
Yes,
because I do feel obviously Egyptology was huge at that time and had been for a little while. I guess from the late Victorian era onwards.
Certainly from the Edwardian. Yeah. And
I don't know. It's something. It's a bit of a sidebar. It might be something to look at in a future episode. These connections between Egypt and Mars seem to be quite numerous, with the idea of pyramids and various other things.
Yeah.
So it's something we certainly get a lot of hints at in this story.
Well, the classic Doctor Who serial, Pyramids of Mars.
Yeah.
Where Sutekh is an alien and he's imprisoned in a pyramid on Mars.
Yeah.
And you got robot mummies and stuff in Edwardian England and stuff. It's one of the best.
That's just great, isn't it? Robot mummies in Edwardian England. You've sold me on that just with those.
It's one of the early Tom Baker ones. It's the Philip Hinchcliffe era when it was basically every story was a riff on Hammer horror, given an alien twist. It's my favourite era. And yeah, it's a classic.
So now, obviously, Seven is detained and restrained for his own protection and for treatment, but he manages to escape. Not before he tells this intern, the unnamed intern, actually, we don't get the name of the opening narrator here, but Seven tells the intern his story before he disappears, and he literally does disappear. All they find are his bare footsteps found in the desert going towards Yoh Vombis till they vanished in the path of a light sandstorm, but no trace of Seven himself has yet been discovered. So he breaks out of the hospital and he just disappears off into the Martian desert. There then follows the bulk of the story, the narrative of Rodney Seven, which we presume this is the story that he told the intern. If the doctors are correct in their prognostication, I have only a few Martian hours of life remaining to me. In those hours, I shall endeavour to relate, as a warning to others who might follow in our footsteps, the singular and frightful happenings that terminated our researches among the ruins of Yoh Vombis. So again, there's a couple of things here. The first thing that I pick up there is Martian hours. Again, that's not explained or there's no detail, but straight away, even the time is measured different where we are.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense because it's different sized planet. But again, it's those small details that just flesh a story out. I think it's this is a really good example. This would be a really good exercise for new writers to go through and read.
Yeah.
about how you can do world building without beating people over the head with it.
Absolutely. Or even old writers, eh?
Yeah.
So there's that. And then I liked this warning. So that's a strong element of a weird tale. The warning to the curious is a running theme in so many things.
Indeed.
Particularly, it seems, to the scientifically curious. Is that a word? Scientifically? It is now. The scientifically curious, the people who go poking around where they shouldn't be poking around, uncovering things that are best left covered up.
Well, I mean, think about it. How many of like your Cthulhu mythos stories? I mean, I can think of several Lovecraft stories off the top of my head that start with the "Let my words be a warning to all those that may follow" kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah. And we get this sense here that we heard that he was exhibiting sort of manic behaviour, but this story is told in a sort of calmer mood. And he even says here, I need to tell you this before the compulsion, before the malignant and malevolent virus which is permeating my brain takes over again. Because as we find out, he has an inkling of when this mania does take him again, what he's going to do and where he's going to go.
We've got a lovely little line here where he says, perhaps death will release me from that abhorrent control, which would urge me down to bottomless underworld warrens of terror for which the saner planets of the solar system can have no analogue. I love that thought that like even Earth, right, with all its insanity, is nowhere as insane as Mars. I like that.
Yeah. That is cool, isn't it? And I did like the phrase "warrens of terror" as well. I was thinking Warren Mitchell, Warren Smith. Have we got the Daves of despair? You know, the Allens of abomination. So I thought that was a nice.
Oh, you see, my brain went in a completely different direction. I was thinking about bunnies and cosmic horror, like Watership Down with tentacles. I'm writing that. I'm doing that.
There's a crossover.
Well, I've done Wind in the Willows, so it's only one step away, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Now there was a weird chapter.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So we get details of the expedition, and again we can see strong parallels. I like that it parallels Mountains of Madness, but it's not a rip-off of it, you know. And this is the thing with Smith and Lovecraft, I think, the way they bounced off each other. So didn't we have this before where, you know, I think I might do a gargoyle story. Oh, I've got a great idea for that. I'm going to do it like this. Oh, I'm doing it like that. They both take the same idea and just come up with something similar and yet very much its own story.
Yeah, part of me thinks, I mean, because it's the same way that, say, you and I collaborate in a weird kind of way. If they had access to the modern way of publishing, digital publication and all that kind of stuff, if they didn't have to go through the rights of the world, well, you can imagine them going, oh, let's do an anthology of gargoyle stories, can't you? You know?
Yeah, which is effectively what we do with Innsmouth Gold and our other projects, right? And I could just give a plug here for our latest Innsmouth Gold, When Shadows Creep. We're just putting out to print at the moment or in the next couple of weeks, which is weird Lovecraftian stories set in London. So that's London from several different time periods. And again, it's so interesting to see what the different authors come up with using the same setting, just the ideas that come up. It's incredibly inventive, I think. Anyway, that's enough of us comparing ourselves to Lovecraft and Smith.
Cheap plug done. You know? Cheap
plug done. That's about the only level we can compare ourselves on, I think, is that we write short stories. And we get our team here. We've got Alan Octave, the official leader. He held his primacy by virtue of knowing more about Martian archaeology than any other terrestrial on the planet. We've got William Harper, Jonas Halgren. Those are the only ones that are actually named. So we've got a few NPCs there, a few nameless NPCs.
Yeah.
And a couple of PCs, I guess they are.
They're sort of red shirts to carry on with your Star Trek analogy.
And they're going to look at Yoh Vombis, which has something of a name or reputation, almost a semi-mythical status, because no one's ever seen it. Even the ubiquitous Octave had never seen it. Builded by an extinct people whose history has been lost in the latter decadent eras of the planet, it remains a dim and fascinating riddle whose solution has never been approached. So this is the first expedition to find this place.
And this is when we meet the natives of Mars, isn't it? described as nude, spongy-chested people who spoke deterringly of vast deserts filled with ever-swirling sandstorms through which we must pass to reach Yoh Vombis. And in spite of our munificent offers of payment, it had been difficult to secure guides for the journey. We're back to that trope again.
It's that trope, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which in the past has been linked to the sort of colonization aspect. You know, it's. I suppose you could say it's sort of the same here in that we're using that trope, but it seems very fitting. And again, it is that idea of the locals know best. They don't go poking around in there for a reason. But no, Mr. Scientist, you know better. Off you go. Oh, look, you've come to a horrible end.
Yeah. It's like if this was a Hammer horror, right? They'd have like a rustic accent, wouldn't they? You know, or an M.R. James. It's no digging here, isn't it? You know,
no digging here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And what I thought was nice with this is the locals give us all this spiel about, you got to cross vast trackless wastes of desert, and there's sandstorms and all sorts of stuff going on. They're there in 7 hours. It's a 7-hour walk, which, you know, you do if you're on a walking holiday, you do that, wouldn't you?
I did it yesterday.
The Pennines or something. Well, there you go.
I did it yesterday. Went out for a little walk, which turned into 13 miles, and took in the Ditchling Beacon. Yeah, so there we go.
Ditchling Beacon.
Yeah,
you didn't find Yoh Vombis.
No, didn't find Yoh Vombis, but we did find the place that's supposedly haunted by spectral hounds. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, nice. I like a bit of spectral hound haunted. Well, I do live in East Anglia.
Well, there you go.
And they seem to find it quite easily, really. The journey was far less tiring than one who is unfamiliar with Martian conditions might expect because of the thin Himalaya-like air. So again, another little strand of world building.
You get the impression that these people were doing that as a deterrent, weren't they? Oh no, it's far too far away. You'll never make it. There's sandstorms and stuff like that. You're better off just going down the pub, mate. You know?
Yeah, you want to forget all that stuff. Yeah. But they find it quite easily. And in fact, they find it so easily, they're not even sure they're at the right place at first. It's sort of like, well, this can't be it, can it? But the disposition of the ruins, which lay in a sort of arc for almost the entire extent of the lower gneissic elevation, together with the type of architecture, soon convinced us that we had found our goal. No other ancient city on Mars had been laid out in that manner, and the strange, many terraced buttresses of the thick walls, like the stairways of forgotten Anakim, were peculiar to the prehistoric race that had built Yoh Vombis. So it is very alien, and I like that it's different even from the other ancient cities on Mars. So again, there's a hint of world building there without giving us any real detail.
Yeah, and we get just after this, we get like comparisons to the hoary sky-confronting walls of Machu Picchu amid the desolate Andes, and how it was different even from that.
Yeah,
because it's like when you see the pictures of those temples and all that kind of stuff, they do look almost otherworldly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the way they're nestled in the trees and they're all overgrown with vines and things like that. It's like that horror movie, The Bruins, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of like that kind of thing. And so to say, they're even weirder than that tells you instantly, well, that's pretty weird.
That's pretty weird.
Yeah.
And we get a sense of, well, what he calls petrified sterility. The whole region was far from the life-giving canals, so there's that particular trope that's used, beyond whose environs even the more noxious flora and fauna are seldom found. We had seen no living things since our departure from Ignar, but here, in this place of eternal bareness and solitude, it seemed that life could never have been. The stark eroded stones were things that might have been reared by the toil of the dead to house the monstrous ghouls and demons of primal desolation. So there's obviously an atmosphere about this place as well. It's not just empty and ruined. It's dead. It's like there's a mausoleum.
Yeah. Something we've seen in Smith's stories when you get like an ensemble cast, for want of a better term, is that there's always one There's always one. Like there's the guy in the Volmar stories, isn't there, that always comes out with the comments. This time it's Harper this time around, because as the sun's setting, he turns around to the rest of them and goes, "That place is deader than an Egyptian morgue." Which I thought was a brilliant line.
It kind of breaks the mood, doesn't it? Everyone else is being very somber, but yeah, it's a great. And again, there's our first sort of Egyptian, or second Egyptian reference, you know.
Yeah.
And we get the sense of time here as well, because Octave says that according to the legends, the people who built this place, the Yorhis, were wiped out at least 40,000 years ago. So, you know, it's way back in the past.
Yeah, and Harper actually continues on after Octave has said that about that there's a story, isn't there, that the last remnant of the Yoris was destroyed by some unknown agency, something too horrible and outre to be mentioned even in a myth. So this guy's my hero in this Harper. I always end up with a favourite, and he's my favourite in this.
Octave sort of slaps him down a bit here, doesn't he? He almost says tish and pish.
Yeah, you know? He does, yeah.
They were probably killed by some epidemic like the Yashta pestilence, which was a kind of green mould that ate all the bones of the body, starting with the teeth and nails. That's a rather unpleasant way to go, isn't it?
Isn't it, yeah.
And then adds, we don't have to be afraid of getting that, because if that is still around, the bacteria will be dead by now. Which is, you'd be sort of tightening up your spacesuit, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you really would, wouldn't you? It's that's what you get, that lovely contrast, because you've got Harper, who's basically the guy he's the guy in the horror movies who turns around and says, "No, splitting up's a stupid idea." But Octave is but
let's go over here.
Yeah.
And now we get some more details about life on Mars, what life on Mars is like. The sun had gone down with uncanny swiftness, as if it had disappeared through some sort of prestidigitation rather than the normal process of setting. So even the sun setting has this eerie quality to it. And we get the instant chill of the blue-green twilight. We donned the coats and helmets of Martian fur, which must always be worn at night. And going on to westward of the walls, we establish our camp in the lee, so that it might be sheltered a little from the jar, that cruel desert wind that always blows from the east before dawn. So we've got that quite sort of typical camping out before we go into the ruins scene. And you can be sure that something odd is going to happen during the night, right?
Yeah, and as we get his description of them retiring, I ended up chuckling to myself, because he describes it as wrapped themselves in the cerement-like folds of grey bassa cloth. Now, if anybody's familiar with Billy Connolly knows that when he had children, he created two words so he could swear in front of them. One of them was Getifer, and the other one was bassa. Getifer, you dirty wee bassa.
I remember that. Yeah. Getifer, you bassa. Nice. Yeah. Swearing on Mars. So that takes us into this night scene, and Seven has a very restless night, and we get this almost feels like a waking dream, doesn't it? The atmosphere of the place is really getting to him. And I love this phrase: the whole scene was locked in a petrific stillness, and none of the sleepers stirred. It's so quiet and so still as to be disturbing.
And I love these descriptions here, that the twin moons, Phobos and Deimos, had risen and were casting spectral shadows across the ruins and stuff. I think that's an incredibly atmospheric scene. It's one of those that I instantly visualized.
Yeah.
These weird, like alien things, but the shadows making them look even more twisted and strange.
Yeah, because that's not something we'd ever experienced here, was it? I mean, not in artificial light. You could do that, but in natural light, there's one moon, there's one sun. I know they can be in the sky at the same time, but one is not casting shadows at that time. So to have two sources of light like that, is that then two shadows or four shadows? I'm not sure how
exactly.
That would work. Yeah,
exactly. That's the thing. It's one of those things that sort of sends your mind into a bit of a spin when you're trying to piece it together. You know, if I was a character in a Lovecraft novel, when I was reading this, I'd probably have failed a SAN roll as I tried to visualize what these twin moons would do to these ruins.
And everything is so still that even a slight movement catches Seven's attention, and he does see a slight movement. I started to sit up, and even as I moved, the shadowy object, whatever it was, drew back and became merged once more in the greater shadow. Its vanishment startled me into full wakefulness, and yet I could not be sure that I had actually seen the thing. In that brief final glimpse, it seemed like a roughly circular piece of cloth or leather, dark and crumpled, and 12 to 14 inches in diameter, that ran along the ground with the doubling movement of an inchworm. So quite a creepy mode of locomotion, even though the thing itself, a circular piece of cloth, doesn't sound particularly horrifying or scary. But in the context of nothing's alive and nothing's moving and the way it's moving, this obviously grabs his attention.
Yeah, it actually brought to mind the original BBC adaptation of Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, the M.R. James story.
Yes.
That scene on the beach, the way the thing moved was just, it's always stuck with me, and I can't watch it without the hairs at the back of my neck standing up. It's the way that it moves.
That was very well done, wasn't it? That, because considering the time and obviously no CGI or AI, then I'm not quite sure how they did that. I've got to research up on that, but it was very striking.
Yeah.
And of course, this is in that state now. You imagine you're warm in your sleeping bag and your Martian furs and all that, and you think you see something, and it's a bit like, should I get up and have a look? It's bloody cold out there. I'm not really sure if I saw something anyway. I probably didn't, though his mind starts working now. This is where we get the fanciful wanderings followed each other in antic procession. So again, the atmosphere of the place and seeing possible movement, it really is playing on his mind. Nevertheless, in the end, he does nod off into a light slumber.
The next paragraph kicks off with another lovely atmospheric sort of touch here. The chill demoniac sighing of the jar across the jagged walls awoke me. It's that you've been woken up by the wind and things like that. It's another... Yeah.
You can hear it, can't you? That whistling, mournful sound. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
And here's a couple of my favourite sentences in the whole story. Then shivering we ate while the sun leapt over the horizon like a juggler's ball, which is beautiful. And then this enormous, gaunt, without gradations of shadow or luminosity, the ruins beetled before us in the thin light, like the mausolea of primordial giants that abide from the darkness-eaten eons to confront the last dawn of an expiring orb.
That's just quintessential Smith, isn't it? That's him. That's his poet nature coming through again, isn't it? It's you have to be a poet to write something like that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Seven's companions are all very eager to get going and explore the ruins. So it's sort of feeling this sort of, well, it's almost like a dread, isn't it? He feels this dread that oozes unseen but palpable from the great unearthly architecture that weighed upon me like tomb-born incubi. So the place has really got to him. But of course, in proper chap fashion, he doesn't feel he can mention the fact that he might have seen something creeping around last night, because obviously it's nonsense.
Yeah. Well, this is why I think this would make a great film, because this is that scene that all good horror films have, where they almost see the monster. They think they may have seen the monster, but they tell themselves they haven't seen the monster. Where the audience is sitting there going, "Run, you idiot."
Don't go in the building.
Yeah.
And the Martians, well, the two Martians, their guides, absolutely refuse at this point to go any further. They're not going anywhere near the place. This is it. They're staying here.
Yeah, it's mentioned, isn't it, that it's this is where you get the taboo, which gives the implication that it's almost like heretical for them to go in there. It's forbidden territory.
Yeah.
And nothing could be said to sway them. It's just like, no way.
Which puts me in mind of Planet of the Apes, right? Was it Beneath the Planet of the Apes with the Forbidden Zone?
Oh yeah, yeah,
The apes were, and of course the human guy. He goes out into the Forbidden Zone and he discovers the humans hidden underground. Again, it's that idea of it's obviously a sort of apocalyptic wasteland, the landscape, and it's apocalyptic because of what lives under the ruins. So why on earth would you want to go in there and start poking around in that?
absolutely. Yeah.
And I love this. This is the equipment check for your explorers party, right? And they make two big mistakes here, two fatal mistakes, as it turned out. For equipment in that preliminary tour, we took along only a crowbar and 2 picks. A crowbar and 2 picks. And they leave behind the dynamite and the guns. What sort of adventurers are these?
Yeah.
This is one of those, there's a couple of scenes in this where you're going, no.
Yeah. Well, again, that would make for a great movie, wouldn't it? Because anything that gets the audience like shouting at the TV, like, "Go, no, you idiot! You've hooked them. They're in. They're invested." You know.
And Octave is well up for this, right? He's visibly excited, and it is sort of doing a running commentary as they go along. You can imagine it. Oh, I see. Look at that, the way that rock is weathered there. Oh, look at the angle of that buttress. You know?
Yeah, he does remind me of those boars you always. Do you remember when you were like a kid and you got taken to like caverns, like the Blue John Mine and stuff like that? And you're on a tour, right? And you've got the little spod doing the read, and like here's on your left is the witch, the stalagmite, and all that. But there's always one in every party, isn't there? Yes, I think you'll find that was formed 2,000 years ago by the, you know, he's one of them that provides the commentary. Yeah.
Whether you want one or not. Yeah, there was that lovely League of Gentlemen sketch with that as well. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah,
I think it was Mark Gatiss as the tour guide.
It was Gatiss, yeah.
Yes, yeah. That's where the boy slipped and fell down the crevice, and we heard him screaming for minutes. So they get into the ruins, and it's almost a little bit disappointing, really, because they don't particularly find anything. Obviously, there's sort of terraces and walls and towers and this kind of thing, but you get the impression it's all half covered in red sand. There's just the wind blowing through, nothing.
This actually reminded me of Lovecraft's Nameless City.
Oh yeah, Irem. Yeah.
Where he arrives at Irem and it's all half covered in sand, and there's just the bits coming out. And
didn't we have the thing in there? He goes down below into the depths and discovers the freezes and all that sort of thing.
Indeed, yeah.
The nice thing with the broken steps is they're obviously designed for longer limbs than those of men or even the gangling modern Martians. So this isn't just an older civilization; it's another alien civilization as well, even from in Martian terms.
Yeah, Modern Martians. There's a band name.
Oh, yes, that's good. Modern Martians, like a B-52s type band.
Yeah.
And then they find it, don't they? They find the thing that spells their doom. They find an opening, half choked with ancient debris. Behind the heap of detritus, we found the beginning of a downward flight of steps. Darkness poured from the opening like a visible flood, noisome and musty with primordial stagnancies of decay. Don't go down the steps.
Yeah.
7 is the only one who's not keen, even now. But he calls it an irrational panic, which is interesting again, which ties exactly back in with our rational brain, primal fears, doesn't it? Yeah.
I mean, you do get that struggle he's had ever since he saw the weird squiggly thing in the night. It's, he's battling this instinct. His primal urge is flight instinct, isn't it?
Yeah, and with good reason. So, you know, maybe this guy's a bit more tuned into his intuition or sixth sense or whatever you want to call it. He certainly seems to have a better survival instinct than the rest of them. And straight away it gets creepy because we've got these high awkward steps, so you can imagine it's a bit of a struggle to get down them. Of course, everything's in torchlight now, so it's narrow beams of artificial light, which is always creepy. We get this vault, a subterranean hallway. Its floor was deep with siftings of immemorial dust, and in places there were heaps of a coarse grey powder, such as might be left by the decomposition of certain fungi that grow in Martian catacombs. Now, already I'm thinking spores and that sort of thing. Again, another little Star Trek reference here is when they beam down to planets, they never have any protective kit on. They've just got their trousers and their shirts. And when they get back onto the ship, there's no decontamination routine.
No. Yeah, I know.
I mean, you go into certain places now, if you're in parts of a hospital or something, you have to wash your hands or put things over your shoes or whatever.
Or even if you go into a zoo and you go into a walk-in enclosure, you walk over the thing soaked with disinfectant and all that, and you've got to do your hands and all that. Yeah.
So already, we've got this idea of this incredibly ancient dust full of spores floating around. It was harder to breathe than the outer air. It was filled with unknown effluvia, and the light dust arose before us at every step, diffusing a faintness of bygone corruption like the dust of powdered mummies. So there's our next Egyptian reference. They find this sort of urn or pan, and Octave, of course, being the leader, has a look at it, and it's like he's just brushing this stuff off, and he sort of gives a sniff, and he takes some in, and he starts to cough and sneeze. I mean, again, how incredibly foolhardy.
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, this was probably just a fumigant. They probably used it as a disinfectant." That's a dangerous assumption to make, isn't it?
Isn't it just?
And we get our first glimpse here of the race that they think might have created this place. The dark stone beneath our feet was marked off in multiform geometric patterns, traced with ochreous ore, amid which, as in Egyptian cartouches, hieroglyphs and highly formalized drawings were enclosed. And these beings, the way they're depicted, is similar to the Ahais, tall and angular, with great bellows-like chests, but they have a supplementary third arm, which issues from the bosom, a characteristic which in vestigial form sometimes occurs among the Ahais. So there's obviously a connection between these two peoples.
Yeah, you get this. If this was in like Mass Effect or something, they'd be called the precursor race, wouldn't they?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Again, there's we mentioned aliens already, and there's going to be quite a strong alien scene coming up. But this is a little bit like that as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Very much.
And then we get this lovely foreshadowing. We perceive two figures whose high conical craniums were wrapped in what seemed to be a sort of turban, which they were about to remove or adjust. The artist seemed to have laid a peculiar emphasis on the odd gesture with which the sinuous four-jointed fingers were plucking at these headdresses, and the whole posture was unexplainably contorted. Yes, well, we soon find out they're not turbans.
Yeah, I thought that was a lovely touch.
Because when you're reading this for the first time, you got a couple of little hints. There's a bit of cloth wandering around, turbans, but I still, as far as I can remember at this stage, didn't have any inkling that it was going to be head monsters, wrap around your head monsters.
Basically head leeches, aren't they, pretty much?
And this is where we get the first glimpse. There's nothing anywhere but the atom-like dust of ages and the jars that held the ashes of a long-extinct people. But clinging to the high roof in one of the further vaults, I saw a dark and corrugated patch of circular form, like a withered fungus. So that puts him in mind of the objects that he saw or dreamt the night before. And that's our first glimpse of what is to come. I suppose our second glimpse. So the one outside is interesting then. Was that like one that had escaped? Did it come out in response to them coming into the city? Has it just been wandering around? And obviously it didn't attack any of them at night. So did it even know that they were there?
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe they work on vibration, so maybe their movement had alerted the presence, but because they were still.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you think of like worms and things like that, that's how they know things are there, isn't it? It's through vibration and that kind of thing, and like tremors.
Tremors, yeah. Oh, that's cool, man. Yeah. And this is where we find an actual mummy, or at least a mummified and incredibly desiccated figure standing erect against the wall. It was more than 7 feet in height, of a brown bituminous colour, and was wholly nude, except for a sort of black cowl that covered the upper head and drooped down at the sides in wrinkled folds. And they're excited to find what is, in effect, the only sort of remains beyond dust that they've seen so far, though they're very curious as to why it's shackled to the wall. So here's your next shouting at the screen, which is, if something is shackled to the wall, it's usually for a bloody good reason.
Yeah. And this is where Octave really cements his chap status with his with his exclamation here. By Jove, this is a real find.
And it's this sort of straight in attitude again. No preliminaries, no mucking around or anything else. He thrust his torch into the mummified face, where shadows moved like living things in the pit-deep hollows of the eyes and the huge triple nostrils and wide ears that flared upward beneath the cowl. And then he puts out his free hand and he touches the body very lightly. What sort of scientist is this guy?
Well, that's the thing. He's acting more like one of those dilettante explorers, the Victorian chaps, that did just go to these places, find a tomb. They didn't think about, how can we get in here gently to preserve it? They just blow the door up and get in, start mucking around with things, you know.
You can imagine picking up the mummy's head and doing like, oh, well, that's poor Yorick, and moving the jaw, can't you? Look at me, I'm a mummy, kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Because, of course, as soon as he touches this, it just dissolves into dust, leaving the head and upper body and arms still hanging in their metal fetters. And once again, he's coughing and sneezing because that cloud of brown powder envelops him.
He's a bit of a moron, isn't he? Let's face it.
It's totally mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a way, that kind of saves the others because they all step back from this cloud of dust.
Yeah.
And he's still there. And now the cowl moves.
Yeah. The black cowl on the mummy's head began to curl and twitch upward at the corners. It writhed with a verminous motion. It fell from the withered cranium, seeming to fold and unfold convulsively in midair as it fell. Then it dropped on the bare head of Octave, who, in his disconcertment at the crumbling of the mummy, had remained standing close to the wall. I'll teach him.
Yes. You wonder if it says here is experienced archaeologist and all the rest of it. It's not sounding that experienced, is it? Or like you say, perhaps this was the standard of the day. I would imagine then things like when they were digging or opening the tombs, they probably had tourists in to watch, you know.
Oh,
Lord and Lady whatever were holidaying in Egypt. Oh, come and watch us uncover Tutankhamun's tomb.
Well, they had mummy parties.
Yeah, of course.
Mummy parties in Victorian London where somebody would go and find a mummy from Egypt, bring it back, and they would get all their friends round, get pissed and unwrap it.
Well, that beats your fondue evening, doesn't it? So now the horror begins. Of course, Octave is shrieking wildly, incoherent pleas for help, tearing with frantic fingers at the cowl, but he fails to loosen it. And then his cries begin to mount in a mad crescendo of agony, as if beneath some instrument of infernal torture. And he danced and capered blindly about the vault, eluding us with strange celerity as we all sprang forward in an effort to reach him and release him from his weird encumbrance. I like that dance and caper. That's suggestive of sort of madness, is it? Like the tarantella or something like that.
Yeah, or even marionettes, anything like that. You know, when you describe somebody as dancing like a crooked marionette, it's very evocative.
And off he goes. He just runs off into the corridors. And we get that classic thing here of, my God, what has happened to him, cried Harper. The man acts as if he were possessed. And there's no time for discussion, so they all chase after him. And we've got the classic example now of the party being split up into their individual little groups.
Yeah.
We went on dividing our party into three contingents when we came to a triple branching of the caverns. Harper and Haugen and myself took the middle passage. We threaded our way through recesses piled to the roof with colossal urns that must have held the ashes of 100 generations. We came out in the huge chamber with the geometric floor designs. Here very shortly we were joined by the others who had likewise failed to locate our missing leader. So this is where we start seeing that alien scene where they go in and they're surrounded by these urns. And you wondered if they are the urns containing ashes of the dead or if there are urns that are imprisoning these things.
Yeah, and you get a sense of the scale here because they have like a hour-long search of the myriad vaults, many of which we had not hitherto explored. All were empty as far as any signs of life were concerned. And yeah, so you get, this isn't just like a little, it's not like your sort of your little crypt or something you get under a church. This is a sprawling necropolis, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then they hear a noise, a most alarming and mystifying sound. It was like the hammering of ghouls on some forgotten mausoleum. And this was a very creepy sort of scene, I think. When we drew near, the beams of our torches revealed a sight that was no less unexplainable than unexpected. A human figure with its back towards us, and head concealed by a swollen black object that had the size and form of a sofa cushion, was standing near the remains of the mummy and was striking at the wall with a pointed metal bar. So there's Chekhov's crowbar we had earlier.
Chekhov's crowbar.
And it obviously is breaking into something, but it's that thing of what was like a cloth is now the size of a cushion.
Yeah.
Why? Or we can guess why.
There's also something that struck me here is in film. Like a great example is the Blair Witch Project. At the end, Heather's looking for Michael in that house, and he goes down in the cellar, and he's standing in the corner with his back to her, just facing the corner of the thing. There's something incredibly creepy about that.
Yes.
Because you imagine these guys are going, "Oi, Octave, over here," sort of thing. No response. He's just with the back to them. There's something. Again, it's probably some primal thing, right, that I don't fully grasp. But there's something really creepy about that.
It is, and that then also reminds me of the lurking fear, where you've got the guy looking out the window, right?
Indeed.
Who fails to respond, and of course, when they turn him round, he's got no face.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is that. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. That's strong image.
Yeah.
So they're too late because Octave flings aside the crowbar and he starts to fumble for something in the wall. It must have been a hidden spring, though how he could have known its location or existence is beyond all legitimate conjecture. So we're back to exactly that idea you said of he's just a marionette at this stage. This thing is pulling his strings.
Yeah. And
as we find out, this thing knows where its colleagues, its kin, its fellows, whatever you want to call them, were obviously shut away behind this huge, it's described as a mausoleum slab, which, with the dull, hideous grating, now swings inwards to reveal.
We all breathe the suffocating fetor, like a draught from inner worlds of immemorial putrescence. Immemorial putrescence, black metal band. Yes.
And 7, at least, has some idea here, because Octave has just sort of turned now, and his job's done, so he's just sort of standing there. You can imagine just a vacant expression on his face.
Yeah.
And 7 thinks, well, I'm going to get rid of this horrible thing on his head. So he pulls out his clasp knife and runs over and stabs the black turgescent mass that enveloped his whole upper head and hung down upon his eyes, which you might think, I suppose he's got good intentions here, but again, it's not a very well thought out plan, is it?
No.
In order to kill the thing on his head, I'm going to stab my friend in the head.
Yeah. And this is where you get some great, really grim descriptions here. What the thing was, I should prefer not to imagine. If it were possible to imagine, it was as formless as a great slug, with neither head nor tail nor apparent organs, an unclean, puffy, leathery thing, covered with that fine mould-like fur of which I have spoken. The knife tore into it as through rotten parchment, making a long gash, and the horror appeared to collapse like a broken bladder. Out of it there gushed a sickening torrent of human blood, mingled with dark, filiated masses that may have been half-dissolved hair and floating gelatinous lumps like molten bone and shreds of a curdy white substance.
We apologise for any listeners who are eating their lunch at the moment. Perhaps a nice bit of cottage cheese.
That is grim, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's not the end of it, is it? Because Octave staggers. I did make a note here of 7 stabs 8 as well, which I thought was
Yeah.
So, Octave falls into the dust. Seven bends over him and rips the thing from his head. I wish to God that I had let it remain. Beneath there was no longer a human cranium, for all had been eaten away, even to the eyebrows, and the half-devoured brain was laid bare as I lifted the cow-like object. I dropped the unnameable thing from fingers that had grown suddenly nerveless, and it turned over as it fell, revealing on the nether side many rows of pinkish suckers arranged in circles around a pallid disc that was covered with nerve-like filaments, suggesting a sort of plexus. So yeah, that real, as you said, the lamprey kind of imagery, and just horrible.
Yeah.
And then that awful question Halgren asks, how long do you suppose he had been dead? Oh, that's grim, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it? It's this is definitely one of Smith's more graphic, I think, which is interesting because Return of the Sorcerer had a real problem of people saying, "Oh, it's too graphic." I think this is actually grimmer.
I mean, that is a very colourful and detailed description of all of that there, isn't it? It's not pulling any punches, and yet, Wright let this one through.
Mm.
As we've seen with Wright, it's difficult to see rhyme or reason sometimes in his decisions. But
yeah.
And then we get the classic scene where the monsters are loosed. Startled, I beheld beneath my torch, far down beyond the door, as if in some nether pit, a seething, multitudinous, worm-like movement of crawling shadows. They seemed to boil up in the darkness, and then, over the broad threshold of the vault, there poured the verminous vanguard of a countless army, things that were kindred to the monstrous, diabolic leech I had torn from Octave's eaten head. So that's where they've been entombed, imprisoned, and now they're free.
Yeah, and that right there that you just read is my favourite band name in this story, Verminous Vanguard.
Double V's. You can see the logo, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I'm going to go Star Trek again here. And I think it was the final episode of the first season of the original series, Operation Annihilate, where there were... I always thought they looked like livers. They beamed down to a planet, and there's these things stuck on the walls and the ceiling, and one of them flies onto Spock's back and immediately attacks his nervous system.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
It was quite a creepy episode.
I remember that. That was one of my favourites, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, of the original series. Yeah.
That was written by a Stephen W. Carabazzo. That was his idea, although apparently, as usual, I think Fontana and Roddenberry rewrote it a certain amount.
Yeah.
But yeah, a very inventive creature. And you can't help but wonder again if any of those people had read this story previously.
Yeah. I mean, these kind of creatures they've been in a lot of sci-fi. Those sort of parasitic, almost leech-like, worm-like, things that crawl in people's ears and all that kind of thing. And
Yes.
That kind of idea of something, I think is an incredibly horrific concept to a lot of people, isn't it? It's why The Last of Us is so quite well revered, I think, because of its take on the zombie. They're not just living dead. They're actually people whose brains have been taken over by the cordyceps fungus.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's that loss of self is an incredibly terrifying idea to most people, more so than death. Yeah.
Yeah, your total identity. And in a sense, you're back to like the pod people thing, aren't you, as well? Invasion of the Body Snatchers, that it's Sandra, but it's not Sandra kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uncanny Valley sort of feel as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, a lot of things draw together in this.
Yeah.
Apart from just the body horror of it as well. That's what I say with this. It's such a mix of Smithian elements, Yeah,
it's kind of like a greatest hits, isn't it? It's I love it because it's got that brilliant decay, which you get in a lot of Smith stories, especially like his Hyperborea and Zothique and stuff like that. But it's also got body horror. It's got some sci-fi. It's got a little bit of everything. It's a brilliant story. I absolutely love this one.
Yeah. So what do chaps do in such a situation? They run away. And let's face it, who wouldn't? But again, you can really picture this. It's the sort of labyrinthine catacombs, torch beams flashing about all over the place, a wave of these things flopping and slopping out of the doorway, and everyone's just running for their lives now.
You can just see the sound effect, can't you? It's that that sound effect that they use, like grease between the palms.
Oh, yeah.
You can just imagine it. Yeah.
I'm thinking as well, like a first-person view from inside the helmet.
Oh,
with the breath going, that kind of thing, and the light flashing.
Like the Alien sequel, when they're watching them all on the screens,
yes.
the cameras in the nest, in the hives. Yeah.
So again, a lot of Smith stuff is, as we said, very cinematic as well. And Seven ends up on his own. He hears some screams. He hears his own breathing. Suddenly, his torch disclosed a human figure coming towards me in the gloom. Before I could master my startlement, the figure had passed me with long machine-like strides, as if returning to the inner vaults. I think it was Harper.
Again, that's a jump scare, isn't it? That looming out the darkness.
And it's Harper, but he's moving like a machine.
Yeah.
It's not human anymore.
Yeah. The eyes and upper head were muffled by a dark, inflated cowl, and the pale lips locked, as if in a silence of titanic torture or death.
The remainder of my flight is a blur of pandemonium terror. Once more, after thinking that I was near the outer cavern, I found myself astray and fled through a ranged eternity of monstrous urns in vaults that must have extended for an unknown distance beyond our explorations. It seemed that I had gone on for years, and my lungs were choking with the eon dead air, and my legs were ready to crumble beneath me, when I saw far off a tiny point of blessed daylight. So yeah, it's that time distortion, isn't it, where you're in a place like this and it seems, well, it might even be hours, because we said how huge this complex obviously is, but it's lost all sense of time. And again, that's that nice trope, isn't it? Daylight.
Yeah. Well, it's the literal light at the end of the tunnel.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Although, of course, this being Clark Ashton Smith,
it's not going to end well. Yeah.
He's nearly there, isn't he? He gets within 12 feet of the opening when, without sound or other intimation, something dropped upon my head from the roof above. Bang. They've got him. And this is horrible now, because we've seen it happen. We've seen the results and the effects of it, but now you get the first-hand experience.
Yeah.
My brow and scalp at the same time were shot through with a million needle-like pangs, a manifold ever-growing agony that seemed to pierce the very bone and converge from all sides upon my inmost brain. I felt the foul vampiric clutch of an atrocious death, and of more than death.
He basically acts in complete panic now, doesn't he? He does the only thing he could do. He's got his clasp knife in his other hand. It's open, he's ready, and he basically starts stabbing wildly at it.
Yeah.
Which is a great sense of panic, because, I mean, that's all you could do, right? Get off.
Yeah, you can't just grab this thing and pull it away or anything else.
No.
It's just latched on, isn't it? So he's got to try and puncture it before it really digs in deep, I suppose.
Yeah.
And again, that idea, of course, these things aren't just feeding on you. We had that mention of poison, didn't we, at the start?
Indeed.
Its bite is injecting something into the brain in order to give it control. He does manage to kind of tear it loose a bit, or you can imagine he's just slashing away wildly. He's cutting it to ribbons. A black strip loosened from above my eyes and dripping with my own blood was hanging down my cheek. It rioted a little, even as it hung, and I ripped it away and ripped the other remnants of the thing, tatter by oozing bloody tatter, from off my brow and head. Then I staggered towards the entrance, and the wan light turned to a far receding dancing flame before me as I lurched and fell outside the cavern. So he's managed, as far as he can tell, to get rid of this thing. And it's the Martian guides who find him, as they always do in these stories.
Yeah, and you get a lovely moment here, because the two Martian guides sort of appear over him. He sees their faces and they start to drag him away. And as he looks back, I think this is a great, it's a great final reel, right? I stared at the black opening with hideous fascination and descried a shadowy stirring in the gloom, the writhing, verminous movement of things that pressed forward from the darkness but did not emerge into the light. Doubtless they could not endure the sun. Those creatures of ultramundane night and cycle-sealed corruption.
Cycle-sealed corruption. That's great, because they've been locked in that place for quite some time, right? So you can only speculate on how long they live or what sort of life cycle they had, how they've survived for so long.
Indeed.
So that's horrible enough, but then comes the final horror, because now the madness comes upon him. There rose an abhorrently conflicting impulse to return, to thread my backward way through all the catacombs as the others had done, to go down where never men save they, the inconceivably doomed and accursed, had ever gone, to seek beneath that damnable compulsion a netherworld that human thought can never picture. So he's got the cool now in his mind. The poison has taken effect.
Mm.
And then this is interesting. It called me to the depths beyond, where dwell the noisome necromantic ones, of whom the leeches, with all their powers of vampirism and diabolism, are but the merest minions. So ones there is spelt with a capital O. So these things, that's just the servants. That's what they send out to bring things back to them.
Yes.
So who are they? Who's the necromantic ones?
Well, this is what I was on about right at the start when I said about that sort of cosmic horror element, because this actually brought to mind Smith's earliest stories involving the old toad god himself, Sarthokua, and his formless spawn.
Yeah.
You know, the formless spawn are basically the servitors of this thing. And, you know, it's similar to Shoggoths and things like that. They were originally a servitor race, but obviously they rebelled.
Yes.
You know, so the implication there that there's some guiding intelligence, you know, that's incredibly creepy. I love it.
That again, it's layer on layer, isn't it? With this, you go from that we're in quite a strange, spooky place, all the way through this body horror, and then you know these added layers. So it takes it beyond. I think, like you say, a conventional horror story. A conventional horror story might have finished there.
Yeah,
you know, but that added weird and cosmic element really elevates it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is what separates it from being a creature feature and being cosmic horror.
Absolutely, yeah, that's it, yeah. So that's pretty much it. The Ahais obviously stop him. You imagine they're quite big, strong chaps.
Yep.
They carry him back to base, back to the hospital. And you can imagine he's sort of complaining all the way and trying to escape from them.
Yeah.
So that's what he's told the intern, obviously in that spell of clarity. Now I must go back to Yoh Vombis, back across the desert and down through all the catacombs to the vaster vaults beneath. Something is in my brain that commands me and will direct me. I tell you, I must go. So there we are in the end. As we know from the start of the story, he does return to an unknown and unnameable doom.
Indeed. Yeah. That's just a great story, isn't it? It's quite rightfully, it's often cited as one of Smith's best. And you can see why reading that. You know, it's right up there with things like Satamprazeros and, you know, some of his other absolute classics. It's right up there.
Totally. And interesting that it's a completely different setting, although we have those elements in it again. You know, we've got ancient ruins, we've got something living there that is, well, you think it's of the place, but are those things of the place, or are they alien to the place? Or is this like a Balrog situation where the builders of the city started digging and delving and uncovered these things in some deep vault, you know?
Indeed. Yeah.
Lots of interesting speculation to be had.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, another story it actually reminded me of is a story that I want to cover for the IBC at some point, which is The Space Eaters by Frank Belknap Long.
Ah, yes.
Because that's a very similar creature, isn't it? But obviously that's on Earth, and it's this, sort of worm-like thing that drops down from the trees onto the guy's head and sucks out his brain kind of thing.
And do you think this is, with all of them, this is their sort of take. I mean, the word vampire comes up a few times there. Is this their take on the vampire story, do you think?
Yeah.
Obviously moving it out from the usual gothic settings and cloaks and coffins and kind of stuff, you know,
Yeah.
which, you know, we all enjoy. Let's face it, it's all great. But this is cosmic vampires. There's another band name, the Cosmic Vampires.
Yeah, because I mean, Wonder-Eye did it as well, didn't he, with the fire vampires?
Yeah,
these sort of extraterrestrial things, you know, sort of a take on it, which it's interesting. I haven't thought about that before, but maybe.
So we've covered some of the background to the story already, and the letters to Derleth and everything else, and well, some of the letters to Lovecraft. There's one or two other little mentions in Dawnwood Spire, Lonely Hill. This is the 23rd of October 1931. This is Smith to Lovecraft. And interestingly enough, this letter is headed "From the Inner Vaults of Yoh Vombis."
Nice.
Dear H. Pi L, I am glad that In the Vault was sensibly reconsidered by Wright. He has surprised me by accepting my Medusa, which he rejected about a year ago. He returned the maker of Gargoyles as melodramatic and somewhat unconvincing, and wants me to speed up the first half of the Vaults of Yoh Vombis on the plea that many of his readers would never get to the interesting portion as it stands. So, yeah, just reinforcing what we said earlier, that idea. We then get another letter where he details a little bit about the changes that he did make. This is 12th of November 1931, and this is posted from the ghoul-haunted vaults of Tremoth after the breaking of the iron chain and lock.
That's a bit creepy. I like it. Yeah.
It's good, isn't it? Dear H. Pyle, so as we said earlier, he mentions this financial situation. However, I did not reduce the tale by as much as Wright suggested, and I refused to sacrifice the essential details and incidents of the preliminary section. What I did do, mainly, was to condense the descriptive matter, some of which had a slight suspicion of prolixity anyhow, but I shall restore most of it if the tale is ever brought out in book form. So, you know, he made, I think, well, obviously he lost himself some money from it. But I sort of want to read that version now just to see exactly what was cut out.
Indeed. Yeah, it's interesting because it's like I postulated about the language being lessened in these stories that were more heavily revised. He basically confirmed it, hasn't he? That is basically what's happened.
And there's one from HPO on this as well. This is the 23rd of September 1931. Lovecraft always goes one better with the addresses, doesn't he?
Oh, he has to. It's like a game of top this, isn't it?
Crater of Yabin on the mountain of the ultimate rim, hour of the black geezer. I am eagerly awaiting the Vaults of Yoh Vombis and will duly insert the indicated correction before forwarding it to Bernard Douillard. The hints you give promise delectation of the rarest sort, and I pray to Begana that Bates may not demand any mutilations calculated to ruin the effect of the narrative. Bernard Douillard. I'm not sure who that refers to.
No, that's one I've not come across before.
Yeah, we shall have to research that.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. Yeah.
There's not actually a note. Normally there'll be a note in the book here, but I can't see one. So that's, if anyone out there does know who that is referring to, let us know. That's Bernard, B-N-A, Dwi, D-W-I, Yahar, Y''H-A-H. No one springs immediately to mind. We know we had the other names for Chime Sleepiest and so on.
That's interesting because it doesn't crop up in, I covered, I read and did a little bit of a dive into that story of Barlow and Lovecraft that they co-wrote, The Battle to the End of the Century.
Yeah.
Which was basically just them mucking about and putting all their mates in and people they didn't like. And there was like loads, but yeah, it doesn't crop up in that.
Yeah, I mean, might sort of suggest Barlow, but Denis-War, I don't get that.
No.
Oh, well, we'll research that and say if anyone out there does know, then please do get in touch and let us know. Speaking of which, thanks to everyone who's got in touch with us over the past few weeks. We will be reading some more of your comments out next time. And thanks as always to everyone who has subscribed, whether on YouTube, whether on Buzzsprout, or especially if you've signed up to our Patreon. If you'd like to join our patrons and help supporting the show, do check our Patreon site. Remember, you get access to bonus content for Strange Shadows and for the Innsmouth Book Club, where we're currently going to be starting a series of bonus episodes covering Lovecraft's fungi from Yuggoth, which we're looking forward to doing. And of course, you get your quarterly copy of Innsmouth News, free admission to events such as the Innsmouth Literary Festival and various sundry other bits and pieces.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say that our recent bonus episode of Strange Shadows, we were looking at Smith's only play, The Dead Will Cuckold You, and whoa, didn't we have fun with that one?
Oh, I did enjoy that. That was a wonderful piece of work. That really was. Now you're talking about Baroque.
Oh man,
I mean,
yeah.
Baroque with a capital B in big squiggly writing.
Well, it was almost Shakespearean, wasn't it? It was brilliant.
Yeah, so that is available for access now. You can subscribe on Buzzsprout, or as we said, if you sign up as a patron, you can get access to that and our other bonus episodes as well. We are going to be doing more bonus episodes this season, so look out for the next one, probably in about a month or so. So thanks very much for joining us today. As always, please do let us know your thoughts on that. You can pop a comment on our YouTube page, our Facebook group, or on Patreon, or you can send us an email at innsmouthbookclub@outlook.com. What have we got coming up next time?
Well, next time we're looking at another story I'm not actually familiar with. It's called The Eternal World.
No, I'm not familiar with this one at all. Never read it before. Is this another science fiction one, do you think?
Well, it looks like it has got elements of it, and it is I think it is.
It has that sort of science fiction-y title, or science fiction sort of title, isn't it?
Yeah, it is more of a science fiction-y kind of one, yeah.
Well, it's got a lot to live up to after reading Yoh Vombis. But I think, as we said, this volume 3 has really got some of Smith's best work, isn't it? And
indeed.
We've already covered Singing Flame, and there's a few more top tales to look forward to. I'm particularly looking forward to Ubo Sathla and the Colossus of Ilorn, 2 of my favourite stories as well.
Yeah. Empire of the Necromancers is another good one as well.
Oh, yes. However, like our Martian stories, that's all very much in the future. So thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time. And with that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.